I've been taking care of my grandma lately. She's been doing pretty bad, and she needs someone to help her almost 24/7. She's got kind of a bone disease or something. It's basically turning her bones into Swiss cheese. And I've had to carry her to the bathroom and room to room for the past couple of weeks. This might seem kind of tiresome to some people, but I'm glad to do it. My grandma and I have always been close. She basically raised me since my mother was never at home. If I can give back to her now, I consider it fair. She's been alone since I was in high school, and those 10 years have been the happiest I've ever seen her. She and Grandpa had been married for decades, 50 years before Grandpa just left, but they never seemed to get along. When I was young, Grandma would always come over and stay the night instead of having me come over there. Grandpa never came to our house. He mostly stayed close to home or went to work, but the few times I interacted with him, he seemed kind of off. Even as a kid, I didn't think he looked right. That might sound a little mean, but over time, he got paler and less coherent. He would mumble to himself with odd whispery things while he was watching TV. Grandma usually kept him in the bedroom with the TV on and the lights off. He disappeared suddenly when I was in the 9th grade, and it had been almost as much of a relief to me as for Grandma. So last week, when I slid her into bed and told her I was going grocery shopping the next day, so, she better get some sleep, she shook her head and looked away. "I doubt I will. I think this might be my last night in this bed." "Why, you eyeing my bed? I'll swap you, but yours is a lot more comfortable than the one I'm in." "No, son," she cut me off, her voice thready and weak. "I think tonight might be the night I pass on." My eyes got a little big. "Do I need to call Miss Sam? If you think you're going to pass, then I should get the nurse out here too." "I don't want them out here. You've been good to me, boy. I just want you here with me at the end. Besides, I need to tell you something. I need to confess my sins before I take them to heaven with me." "I mean, I can call Pastor Ferris over if you need to talk to someone about matters spiritual." "No, not Bobby Harris either. I want to confess to you. It's family business, and once I confess it to you, it'll be your burden to carry after I'm gone." I hesitated, thinking that I might not want this secret as I looked at Grandma's face. I had seen that face smile more than anything else, but the look she had now reminded me of something else I'd seen when I was young. It was something I hadn't noticed until I looked back through the lens of time, but Grandma had always seemed a little nervous whenever she stayed at our house. I caught her more than once checking the doors and windows, looking through the living room curtains as if expecting to see someone there. It always made me think that she was scared of someone. It was a look that always made me think a stranger was trying to get in so they could take me away. The truth, it seemed, was darker than that, though. I took a seat on the bed, willing to listen as little as I wanted to. "I'm here, Grandma. If you need to tell me something, then I'll listen." She nodded, looking out the window in her bedroom like someone might be there. "Your granddad didn't disappear," she said, wetting her lips with her wrinkled tongue. "I killed him." That was a shock, and my face must have said as much. She smiled, without much mirth. "Didn't think your old grandma was capable of something like that, huh?" "No, it's just surprising. You guys lived together for decades. I'm not sure why you would choose 10 years ago to..." It wasn't the first time," she said, her voice as thin as a spider web. "I killed your grandpa for the first time in 1973. 10 years ago was just the last time I had to kill him." I was confused, and I said as much, but Grandma only nodded. "Your grandpa, your real grandpa, died in 1972, but he didn't stay dead." She laid it all out, something that took us nearly into the next day. but she never stopped looking out the window as she spoke. I realized now she was looking for Grandpa. When the call came, I was pregnant with your mother. Your grandpa had avoided the draft by attending college and had managed to avoid it again with a waiver from the government. He was an engineer working on bridges and sewer systems in D.C., and I was looking forward to having him home for a few weeks. He had promised to come home before the baby was born, and he was excited to meet his daughter. We had wanted children for years, and when we talked, you could hear the tears on the verge of coming out whenever he talked about our future. The phone call that day, however, seemed to be the end of that dream. They said he'd been killed in a car accident, and that it had been very quick. He had been driving to a job site when someone had run a red light and slammed into the driver's side door. They said he died instantly, hadn't suffered a bit, and I suppose that should have been a mercy. They wanted to bury him in the Capitol, but I was adamant that he be buried here. I wanted his daughter to see him, to know her father, but I couldn't have known how much she would know of him. A week later, before his body was even home, I heard someone in the kitchen late one night. Grandma's voice got low, the husk making my skin crawl as she stared through the little window into the past. I must have looked aside as I came out with the baseball bat, but he never saw me coming. It was a man in military fatigues, eating a sandwich and sitting at my table like he owned the place. He hadn't bothered to turn on any of the lights, and the closer I got, the more I saw. He'd left a duffel bag on the floor beside him, and there was a glass of milk sweating on the table beside his plate. His fingers slipped into the white bread, and the lettuce and tomato looked wet against the roast beef poking out. I didn't challenge him. I didn't think he even knew I was there. When I hit him in the side of the head, he went down like a sack of potatoes. I killed him in that one hit. Hit him just right, I guess, but when I went to see who it was, I felt like I might have a heart attack. It was your granddad. He was laid out on the floor, bleeding from the ears, his blood staining his fatigues. I looked up the pins he had been wearing years after the fact and realized he'd been a corporal in the army. His paperwork said he was back on leave for the birth of his child. He was on 2 weeks of leave before he went back to Vietnam. I was confused. My husband had never been in the army, and as I sat there trying to figure out what to do, I decided to just bury him in the backyard. My husband was dead, and calling up the police to let them know that this man had broken in so we could eat a sandwich would only muddy the waters. So I buried him in the backyard. No easy feat for a woman 7 months pregnant. 3 days later, I was sitting in the living room folding laundry, just trying to get back to normal, when I heard a key in the front door. I heard someone coming in, set the bag down on the end table, and then I heard the last voice I ever expected to hear again. "Sorry I'm late, dear. There was something in the office I had to set up for tomorrow before coming home." It was your grandpa, dressed in a crisp white button-up and pressed suit pants. His tie was blue and white, something I'd never seen before, and it looked expensive. I'd never seen any of his clothes, and I was the one that did all the laundry. He spread his arms wide, waiting for a hug, but I couldn't move. I'd killed him. I'd killed him 3 nights ago. I watched him die, and as I backed away from him, I saw his face twist in confusion. It was painful, a look that hurt my heart. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's me. It's Wendell, your loving man." I was against the door frame, hyperventilating, clutching my stomach as your mother kicked inside me. She could sense my fear, feel my uncertainty, and she was responding in kind. He took a step towards me, and I curled into a ball as I tried to protect myself from whatever he meant to do. I expected him to try to attack me, to turn into a vengeful spirit and come after me, but instead he just wrapped his arms around me and hugged me close. "What's wrong, darling? Are you okay? Talk to me." It sounded just like him, and when I wrapped my arms around him, I realized it felt just like him too. The smell of his aftershave, the rasp of his 5 o'clock shadow on my cheek, the way his hair smelled like seltzer blue. It was all things that let me know it was him. When he hugged me to him, I gasped as I felt the lump on his inner arm where a birth defect had left a bone poking slightly out. It was him. It was your granddad, and I just leaned into him and sobbed as he helped me to my feet and took me to the bedroom. I checked the back of his head later that night when he slept, but there wasn't a mark or anything to lead me to believe that he had been the one I'd clobbered a few nights ago. I lived with that version of your grandpa for 6 months. He worked as a manager at a paper company, his degree in business instead of engineering, and he made a comfortable living for us. If I needed a reminder of the old times, however, I only had to look at the graduation photo hanging in the hallway. It was me and your grandpa in his cap and gown, and me in my best dress, smiling as his mom snapped a photo. I caught him looking at the picture sometimes, trying to rationalize it, before finally moving away to do whatever he'd been heading out to do. He was there for the birth of your mother, and I settled into a life of maternal bliss after that. Your grandfather was much the same as he'd always been, trading talk of bridges for talk of stocks and paper sales, but he was still the same man he'd always been. He loved your mother and me dearly. We never wanted for anything, but after a while, I suspected that something was off about him. It started with the sleep talking. He would mumble ceaselessly from the time his eyes closed till the time they opened again. Your grandfather had always been a prolific snorer, ever since he was little, as his mother liked to say, but now he never seemed to breathe at all when he slept. He would mumble on and on about sewers and the war and stocks and paper and raising dogs and breeding horses and a million other things. Between your mother's nightly feedings and your grandfather's ceaseless muttering, I had become ragged. I couldn't sleep with all that yammering, and no matter where I slept, it always seemed to find me. I tolerated it until one night when I heard something familiar. I came awake to the sound of someone chewing and mumbling. "Where are they? Chew, chew, chew. I can't believe I had to make my own food. It's not enough that I, chew, 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 went and fought them for her, but now I have to make my own sandwich." I had been sleeping on the couch, trying to get some sleep away from the muttering, and as I crept up the hall, listening to him mumble, and even the squeak of the door didn't rouse him from his nightmare. She couldn't even bother to wait for me, chew, chew, chew. Just because my bus was a little late, I'm a war hero, a soldier, and she can't even chew, chew. But he paused then, before gasping harshly. "Ah, my head! What the hell is that? It's Maggie! Oh God, she's killed me! She's killed me! She's bashed my head in with a bat! I'm dead on the floor, dead right by my kitchen table. My blood's going everywhere. She's killed me! The pillow was over his face before I could stop myself. I was just so ragged, so mentally fried that I knew he would tattle on me. He'd wake up and tell the police, and they'd find the body, and he'd be here alone with your mother, and who knew what would happen then? He wasn't her father, couldn't be her father, and he might hurt her or kill her, or... She looked back at me, and I could see her eyes swimming with tears. He only struggled a little, and then I had another body to bury." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes returning to the window, before continuing again. "The next one was a car salesman, but he was less like your grandfather than the one before. I read something about how if you photocopy a photocopy, the quality degrades until it's almost unrecognizable. That's how this was. The next one sounded less like your grandfather than that, was paler than him, and seemed to get lost sometimes. I lived with this one for 2 years until he suddenly wandered into traffic outside our house. I told the police that this one was a cousin of my late husband, and that was why he looked so similar. The one after that bred horses, and when one of them threw him, I buried him at the edge of the range where he worked and went home expecting to find another one. I was becoming pretty good at losing husbands by then, and when the next one showed up, I hit him with a frying pan and left him in the backyard with the others. By the time your mother came home from school, there was a new one in the living room, reading the paper. Over the years, I'm ashamed to say I've experimented on how durable they are. I pushed one off the roof after asking him to fix something for me. He broke his neck, and I added him to the growing mass grave in my backyard. I poisoned one over the course of a year until he finally dropped dead one morning over his oatmeal. I pushed one off a mountain during a hike, only to return to the hotel and find a new one there waiting for us. The copies became paler and less coherent. The voices became softer and less substantial. It got to the point that he couldn't hold a job. His mind was like a dementia patient, and I would look up sometimes and find him watching me through the window of wherever I was. Your mother had moved out of the house by then. A retirement check from somewhere showed up in the mailbox from a company that manufactured pipes. The money was good, the money kept us afloat, but I was tired of living with this pale ghost. Then, about 8 years ago, he walked out of the house one morning and never came back. In many ways, it was a blessing. I had become responsible for him. I had to take care of him and lead him around like a child. Suddenly, I was responsible for just me again. I kept cashing those checks until they stopped coming about a year ago, and I kept waiting for the day when he'd come back. I almost dreaded it because it would mean that he had died, and a new pale copy would take his place again. Grandma turned away from the window, locking eyes with me as the night slid by outside. "Now it's your secret. It's your secret and your burden. The bodies in the back are still there. I checked periodically, and though they decompose, the bones remain. I don't know if this version of your grandfather will ever come back, but you will have to watch for him now. I've left everything here for you. The house, the accounts, everything. It's yours now, and I pray it brings you joy." She lay back then, and I could almost watch the life slipping out of her. By midnight, she was dead, and when I turned to get the phone, I saw what she had been waiting for. Gramps was paler than I remembered him, but he looked exactly the same otherwise. He waved at me as he stood there before backing away and leaving the way he had come. I went to the backyard and looked, but there was no one there, and no clue that anyone had been there in the first place. We buried Grandma in a plot next to Grandpa's original body. She lay peacefully there beside her husband. The caretaker tells me that someone comes to see her, though, leaving a single wildflower behind before moving on. I don't think he'll come back, but who's to say what the future might bring? In the meantime, I called the police to let them know about all the bodies in the backyard. The sheriff came and exhumed them, asking all kinds of questions that he didn't seem to believe the answers to. He had them tested, and to his surprise, all of them came back a match for my grandfather. Dental records, DNA, hair samples, it all comes back a match, and they were all left scratching their heads. They couldn't really charge my grandmother with anything. You can't put a dead person in prison after all, and they were left with a mystery for the ages. Either way, it's nice to have the bodies gone, and it was good that Grandma got to die at peace. As for Grandpa, I guess I'll just have to wait for the day when a new one shows up. Hopefully, I won't have a body of my own to bury when he does. Little is known about my grandpa, which is strange, but it's not like he's ever been a person of interest. All that we knew was that he was in the army. After that, he suffered from PTSD and died under mysterious conditions. The end. It was December 2017. Nathan and I were home decorating for Christmas. Mom was out on a shopping spree. We were jerking around when Des showed up, a longtime friend of mine. With the three of us in the house, something was bound to happen. Nathan decided to go call his girlfriend, Anne. They'd been going out a couple of days now. "Dude, who's this?" Des pointed to the urn that was situated under the tree. "That's Grandpa. You can touch him. I know you're into freaky stuff." But it was already too late. His hands were all over the thing. Des had already opened the urn. Looks like drugs. What do you think would happen if I snorted some of it? Think you'll get high or just dead? He took a handful out of the urn. I inched closer to try and take it away from him. "Dude, come on. I don't think you'd get high." "Probably not." He raised an eyebrow and smirked. I knew that look. We'd been friends for over a decade, and I could tell when he had a messed up idea. He was an idiot. Maybe so was I. That's when we got along. Plan was simple. Get Nathan to snort the grandpa ashes and get first-hand experience of what would happen. Chances are, nothing would happen. I got the camera ready while Des planted some ash residue on the top lip and nostril to act like he'd already snorted some. With the ash residue on his nose, it was go time. Knowing my little brother, he'd be too innocent and too easy to fool. "What are you guys up to?" he asked, when he saw Des wiping his nose and howling. "Whew! Now that you're done taking care of business, my boy, how about some of this?" Des grabbed him by the neck, leading him to the table where lines of something were spread out. "I don't know, man. I don't think he can handle it," I said, looking at Nathan as I gaslighted him to get a reaction. See, the thing is, if he'd known me better, he would have seen right through me. I don't even let him smoke weed with us. Why would I let him have any of whatever this was? I saw him bite down. I can. Beating his chest, trying to boost his bravado, he lowered his head, taking a deep breath and snorting the whole line. Des and I both burst out laughing. Nathan was confused for a while. Then he went stiff, his body starting to convulse. He fell to the ground, rolling and blinking rapidly. "What's happening? What's going on?" Des shoved me to the side and tried to steady him. "Get some water," he told me. I came back with a glass of water and he downed it. "What the hell, bro?" He looked at me. "What? I was thirsty." Then he proceeded to slap Nathan. "Wake up! Wake up!" Nathan continued to jerk his body. Then he went limp. There was a deafening silence in the room. Beads of sweat dribbled down my face. I splashed him with water and he woke up. What'd you guys do?" he yelled at us. We told him what had happened. We couldn't keep a straight face. We laughed about it. Then Nathan started wearing more than one jacket. He claimed he was cold. We shrugged it off. He'd come and snuggle with Mom during movies. Mom's warm, he said, and eventually fell asleep. It was weird. The dude was 17. Still, I was getting an uneasy feeling that I kept shutting off. At times, he'd complain about how his girl, Anne, was not giving him much warmth. I assumed he was talking about sex or something and getting his blood going. How little I knew. Nathan stopped going out, and Anne stopped calling. He had quieted down about being cold. Around midnight, I'd catch him in front of Mom's room, snuggling something like a blanket. Every time I'd knock on his door, he'd come rushing out. "Everything okay, bud? What's up with Anne? Y'all break up?" He'd just act like everything was okay. Then one day, while we were watching a movie, Dez leaned over and told me, "Dude, I heard from Cass's boyfriend Diego, who went with Brian to the theater, about how Matt's cousin, you know, his brother's a little slow. He heard Kelly say, 'Anne's missing.' I don't know, dude. It's kind of weird." That was news to me. Nathan told me that everything was fine, and he had just spoken to Anne. I think he's lying. We need to check out his room. Dez looked at me like I was high. He sized me up from head to toe. I mean, I was high, but he was making it a little obvious. I'm not about to go in your brother's room and check out his weird collection of who knows what." "Hey, what are you doing? Let go!" Nathan had fallen asleep, snuggled up with our mom on the couch like he did sometimes, and I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. A strong stench wafted from Nathan's room as we approached. We had to cover our noses. "That's nasty, man. Does he crap the bed or something?" Ugh. I turned around, looking for something out of place. Dez had pulled his blanket and found the source of the smell. There was what appeared to be skin, neatly laid there. Parts of it were jagged. It was signs that whoever had skinned the person was an amateur. "What are you guys doing?" We both spun around and found Nathan standing there, eyes hollow and devoid of emotions or recognition. He tilted his head to the side. "Oh, I see you found Anne's blanket. She was saying I was getting under her skin, so I got under her skin all right. See, Tate, I've been feeling chilly for a while now, but Mom's home, and Anne's skin helps me sleep better at night. There's 2 more fabrics to that skin blanket, though." He took a few strides towards us, snuggling the thing, bloodshot eyes watching us. You killed Anne and took her skin? What, are you sick?" The whole scene made my head hurt, realization dawning on me. He was possessed. He had to be. "You're messed up, man. Like, really messed up." Dez pulled the skin by the corner. There were bloodstains and bruises. The thing was flappy. He scrunched his nose. "He's capable of that. What else is he capable of? He killed Anne and skinned her. That's just sick, man." Nathan giggled. "Nuh-uh. Anne's alive. I love her. So I didn't kill her. She killed herself to keep me warm. After the whole ordeal with the powder, I was feeling cold, you know?" My heart sank, blame crashing into me. "We did this. We did. We need to fix it. We need to fix you." I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, heart hammering in my chest. My breath was strained, and I went in for a hug. "We?" Dez asked, while trying to get the cogs in his head working. "What you mean, we? Nuh-uh, brah." I watched Nathan get in bed and pull Anne's skin over his body as he let out a deep sigh. "Close the door on your way out," he said, pulling it tightly around his body, almost snuggling it. He was smiling. "Look, you might be wondering why we were so calm about all this. Some of it was the weed, but some of it was us realizing we couldn't tell anybody. Because we had done this. Dez's place was the best place to think without Nathan eavesdropping. We didn't want to make him suspect us. When our heads were cleared, we yelled and kicked things and cussed at our stupidity. So your grandpa possessed your brother, and now he's doing his bidding. Your brother's a crybaby. This can't be him. Dez was going up and down, biting his nails. And dead people are cold, meaning that's why he's feeling cold, and he only finds warmth in those he loves, like your mom. I fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. It went to voicemail. I tried it, and it went straight to voicemail again. Des told me to put my phone on record because he had a weird feeling. We needed to do something, but without a solid plan, things could get out of hand. That's how we did things, though. Act now and think later. Des was quick to Google some exorcist stuff and phrases. We got holy water, salt, and crosses, and we ran like hell back to my place. The lights were off, which was strange. We tried our best to sneak in and turn the lights on. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his skin blanket wrapped around him. The whole room reeked of decay, but he seemed to be asleep. Slowly as possible, we made our way towards him. Just as we came to within arm's reach, he woke up. His eyes were blood red, and he went feral. He jumped up, gnashing his teeth and fingernails in my face. He was clawing with that thing dangling off his shoulder like a cape. Des yanked him by the skin blanket, trying to get him off of me. Oh my God, it's so slippery, it stinks. Nathan turned around and headbutted him, and he fell with his nose bleeding. I splashed him with the holy water, and he shrieked, retreating to the corner. His voice went deep. Son, don't. It's Grandpa Max. I'm so cold. I splashed him some more, and he whimpered, demurring as his demeanor changed. Tate, what's happening? What are you doing? It was my brother's voice, his eyes pleading. Please, help me. I'm so cold. Everything around me became muffled. I looked at what I was doing, then back to the person before me. I'm sorry. Des pushed me to the side and threw salt on him, yelling, Exi ergo transgressor, exi ergo transgressor, exi subtutor plene omne dolo et fabulace. Vertitus immiscique innocentium persuator. Nathan growled through gritted teeth as Des went on speaking that faux Latin. A cacophony of words rained down on us. His eyes rolled to the back of his head. Lights began to flicker. He grunted like a feral animal as drool dribbled down his chin. Ni vecigu la lordum de la absimo. Nathan's body twisted and jerked. He cocked his head to the side and ground his teeth. We kept throwing salt and holy water on him, Des reciting his phrases. There was yelling back and forth in a deep, rumbling voice as Des went on. Then everything went silent. Nathan fell to the ground, limp. Is it over? Is it done? I didn't respond, but I dashed to my brother's side. I hugged him tight, and as I held him, he seemed to come back to himself some. What happened? Why am I wet and on the floor? When we told him about what had happened, he sobbed and threw away the skin blanket. His eyes looked droopy, the bags under them showing that he hadn't been sleeping much. A week later, Anne's case was closed. I went to a public phone to give the police an anonymous tip, and that was the last we heard of it. When my phone rang, I looked down and saw it was Des. Sup? I asked. He took a deep breath. This feels way too easy, don't you think? I mean, how it all went down. He waited for my response, and when he got none, he continued. See, right now, I'm in Nathan's room. Remember when we asked what happened, and he said he didn't recall anything? But then I asked if he knew any Latin prior to speaking it. You know, that stuff he was yelling back at us. He said it wasn't Latin. It was Spanish. I rolled my eyes. What are you getting at? Cogs in my brain starting to grind and sync. Des paused, but continued with a deep sigh. That's the thing. My incantation was in Latin. He was responding in Spanish, meaning he remembers. I know he says he doesn't remember, but what if he's lying? What if he was never possessed? What if... The line went dead after that, the beating of my heart echoing through my eardrums. My hands were slippery with sweat. I had trouble dialing his number. I tried calling Des back, but his phone never went through. I received 3 documents on my phone from him, and that was the end of it. When my parents told me I was going to be sent to take care of my great-grandfather, I was very hesitant. My great-grandfather, Iman Franger, celebrated his 110th birthday in December. Not that anyone had been invited to his party. Actually, there had been no party, because my great-grandfather was a shut-in. He was a famous horror writer, writing and publishing stories since the turn of the century, and he was supposed to have a small fortune saved up. As such, he lived in a Mary Shelley-style house out in the middle of nowhere, toiling away at his latest work of terror. My mother had 5 sisters, and all of them had been trying to get the highly coveted spot in Great-Grandpa's will. But so far, none of my cousins had managed it. It wasn't like I wanted any of his money, but Mom was insistent. She had been after Great-Granddad's money, just like her sisters, since her early adulthood, and now it seemed that her time had finally come around. Since all my other cousins had struck out, this seemed to be her chance. She told me to go and spend the summer, and maybe some of the fall with him, and see how things worked out. Bring some of your writings with you. Maybe that'll get you in good with the old man. And that was how I came to be on my great-grandfather's porch in mid-May, preparing to stay until nearly Halloween. The house was an old 3-story that I knew was nearly a mansion from the few times I'd been there as a kid. There were 8 rooms, 5 bathrooms, a kitchen, a study, and of course, my great-grandfather's office on the 3rd floor. Sometimes you could see him through the large bay window as he sat up there, hard at work at the old typewriter he favored. He had once sat close to the window so that he could look out and perhaps be inspired by the forests or the lawns that surrounded his property. Now, it appeared, he preferred a spot away from such distractions. I rang the doorbell and was unsurprised to hear the lock click open electronically. Great-grandpa kept no staff. Before I'd been born, a few of his caretakers had turned up missing, and after several searches of the home and property, Great-grandpa had finally just dismissed his staff and lived alone. He had mostly relied on the kindness of his relatives, or just done without for most of my life. He was very reclusive, and I wasn't really looking forward to spending the next 6 months in his company. I'd been preparing a manuscript to send off for publication, and I figured that I would have little time for revisions if I was too busy tending to my aging grandsire and his monstrous house. Looking back on it now, I see that I really had no idea what was in store for me. The house had a musty look to it, like some old Gothic construction from one of Great-grandfather's novels. I don't know if this was intentional, but it gave the place a very uncared-for look. I had to wonder what my cousin Leslie had actually done here when he stayed for 8 months last year. The floors were dusty, the drapes in the kitchen were growing a fine crop of mold from a leaky window, and the whole place just had a very dank smell about it. Given the house's age, this was no surprise. The house was well over 100 years old, and had been both my great-grandfather and my grandfather's ancestral home. Now, it was little more than a hulking relic that sat waiting for my great-grandfather to die so some construction company could turn it into a strip mall. A speaker crackled in the foyer, and the buzzing sound made me jump a foot. "Don't just stand around counting the silver. Come up to my study. I have orders for you." Even at 110, it sounded as though he hadn't lost the steel in his voice. So I climbed up the 3 flights of stairs, wondering how my great-grandfather made it up and down these stairs every day. He must come down to eat, I reflected. He hadn't had anyone to help him since Leslie had left 6 months ago. As my young, sturdy legs made the climb up the creaky old boards, I reflected that I was nearly winded as I came to the 2nd floor landing. I would soon become quite intimate with those steps in the months to come, though. My grandfather sat in the topmost room, a room that had once been the attic. The 2nd set of stairs had been built just for him, and they were steeper than the original set by far. As I came up the stairs, I could see my grandfather's desk and the battered old wingback chair he had owned since I was a child. The desk and the chair sat in profile, and it was like a scene from a movie. The camera would start a slow pan in and mount the stairs, and the audience would see the back of the red upholstered chair and hear the clicking of the keys. He sat hunkered there like a gargoyle, arthritic fingers tapping away at the keys of his old battered typewriter. The sound was skeletal somehow, like bones against ivory. He kept right on clocking away as I stood a respectful distance behind his chair, not wanting to get off on the wrong foot with this ancient writer that I must share quarters with for the next few months. The attic room was the size of a normal studio apartment and appeared almost Spartan in its furnishings. There was a bed, small and neat, several sagging old bookcases that looked equally as infected with mold, a rug that stretched from the landing to his dark mahogany desk, which sat ever facing into the corner. He had once faced it towards the large picturesque window that looked over his property, but now it looked only into the corner, as though someone had put my ancient grandsire in time out. "I understand that you are to be my new caretaker." I jumped a little, the clicking leading me to believe that he would go right on ignoring me for a little while longer. His voice was creaky, raspy from lack of use. I expected to see dust puff out from behind the chair, and when he turned, I decided that my expectations hadn't been far off. To call my great-grandfather ancient would have missed the mark. The man was shrunken to the point of elvishness. He could not have been more than 4 feet tall, and his arms and legs looked shrunken and childlike. His arms were held out in front of him, hands held down at the wrists in a way that made me wonder how much it must hurt him to ride on. His legs hung an inch above the floor as he sat in that monstrous chair, and I remember thinking that he looked like a child sitting in his father's seat. The image was more grotesque than humorous, however. "You should know that I have high expectations for my helpers. I give no special treatment for family members. Your life here will be hard, but focus on the silver lining. You might just manage to acquire that oh-so-coveted spot in my will that my children and my children's children and now my children's children's children seem so incapable of garnering. Anything is possible, I suppose." And when he shrugged his shoulders, I imagined that I could hear them grind together. Listening to him talk was like watching a particularly talented bit of ventriloquism. His accent was plummy, cultured, and far too deep for the child-sized creature residing in that throne. I expected someone to poke their head out from the back of the chair any minute now, and laugh, saying how they had gotten me. When we both ended up staring at each other for the next few seconds, and no grand revelation was revealed, he went on. He told me about his meal schedule first. He ate breakfast at 5, lunch at 11, and dinner at 6. He subsided almost entirely on Campbell's soup, of which he had a large supply in the pantry. There were 7 different flavors of soup, one for each day of the week, and every month there was a number I would call to have more delivered. He told me that I could make a list of food I wanted as well, and that they would be delivering it to the house with the order. "Just keep the bill under $500 a month," he droned. "I would like to remain in funds until I die." He bathed every night at 7. While he assured me that he didn't need help bathing, he would need help getting to the bathroom, into the tub, out of the tub, and back to his room. I was to put him in the tub and then leave until summoned again. He would be fully dressed again, and when I arrived, I would help him back to his room. His schedule, other than that, seemed to be writing. He wrote sometimes for 18 or 19 hours a day, and would often write well into the night if the mood took him. He rarely slept, he told me, and I would likely find him napping in his chair if I needed something early in the morning. He slept most often between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. I was not to disturb him or make any noise between those hours whatsoever. "When you're my age, you find you just don't need to sleep as much as normal people, but I won't have the little that I do get disturbed by your needless clatter." My duties, other than feeding and bath time, were my own. I would like the house swept once a week, the windows opened once a week to air out the dust, the drapes taken down and washed once a month. I have a sneaking suspicion that feckless cousin of yours didn't accomplish any of these things, so it's likely a mess down there. I do not own a TV, nor do I have internet. There is a phone in the kitchen that you may use if you should need to,
And while I do have electricity, I expect you to turn the lights off behind yourself. I seem to recall that your cousin Winifred racked up a $400 power bill while staying here, and I ejected her for it. So long as you follow my rules and keep the house, I suspect I will ignore you for your stay here, and you will have no hardships."
He dismissed me after that, and thus began my time in my great-grandfather's house, a time I would come, in later years, to regret undertaking. It first began with the typing. My grandsire hadn't lied. He wrote 18 or 19 hours a day, and the keys of his typewriter were loud. You could hear him typing away from anywhere in the house, and the noise became a constant background drone. Using my hotspot on my phone, I was able to get some writing done, and my proofreading was coming along very well. It was slow, and the signal out here was poor at best, but I plucked away at it as dutiful as I could, despite the distracting sound of all that clacking. The sound almost seemed to scuttle, worming its way into your ears like phantom fingers as you sat trying to concentrate. I tried playing music, I tried using earbuds, but no matter how high the volume, the sound seemed to clatter against my senses like a badly played piano. I began to become rather sympathetic for a certain Poe character, having my own telltale heart clattering at all hours of the night. On sunny days, I would even take my laptop out onto the lawn and get some work done. Though it defied all logic, I imagined that I could hear that typewriter, even on the porch, or on the way to the mailbox down the lane, easily a half-mile from the house. I know how it sounds, but I also know what I heard, and it invaded not just my waking hours, but my resting hours as well. That's also how the dreams started. Sometimes I would dream that it was me sitting in that big old chair, typing away for hours on end as the words just came sliding up the paper. In my dream, the paper was never ending. It simply rolled on and on as it came out of the typewriter. The words rose like a tree in the forest before my very eyes. My fingers would clack endlessly on the keyboard, my young, strong digits becoming withered like great-grandfathers as I typed my life away. I was always in front of that big bay window as I worked, watching the fireflies out in the woods as they frolicked. Sometimes, though, I would catch a glimpse of myself in the mirrored glass and jolt awake as my great-grandfather's face looked back at me. Then, there was the whispering. The whispering had likely been there from the start, but I didn't pick up on it for several weeks. Great-grandpa didn't own a vacuum, so I was stuck sweeping the floors and taking the drapes outside to beat them with a broom. Fortunately for me, carpets were not all the rage at the turn of the century, and Great-grandpa had hardwood floors throughout. I was sweeping the second floor when I heard a spidery whisper coming from the stairs at the end of the hallway. It was nearly unintelligible, the voice the thinnest of whispers, but my great-grandfather was unable to match it in his response. "I won't. You can't make me. You don't even know if he could take my place. It doesn't matter. I won't curse him with the same life I've been cursed with. Stop whispering in my ear and let me finish." Then came the loud crash of keys resumed, and Grandpa ignored whoever had been whispering to him. I thought about it as I swept, unsure what to make of it. Who had he been talking to? More importantly, who had he been talking about? I knew that he had no phone up there. If he needed something, he always called down the stairs, and the whispering had sounded like it was coming from right inside the room as opposed to a phone. I shook it off as the senile ramblings of the old and troubled man and went about my chores, wanting to get them done so I could return to my own work. That was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last time I heard those whispers. I began to hear them in more than just Grandpa's study as well. They began as something like the scrabbling of mouse feet, a skittery noise that scrabbled across my senses sometimes. The longer I listened, the more I heard, and what I heard was frightening. They whispered about far-off places and foreign hellscapes. They whispered about terrible devils and ancient evils, all of which would win in the end, despite the hero's best efforts. I heard them sometimes in my sleep, a place I could not escape them, and they often filled my dreams with terrible prophecy. The work was literally the third indication that something was amiss. While Grandpa's genre had always been horror, I was more interested in fantasy and YA. My current manuscript was a puff piece, something to get my name on the desk of an agent or a publisher so I could work on more groundbreaking fantasy. My story was good, warring vampire clans, and a romance that was trying to blossom amidst the chaos, but it was nothing new. It was a safe bit of YA pseudo-fantasy, the kind that had a built-in audience and was fairly safe. The longer I worked on it inside Grandpa's house, though, the darker the story began to become. Characters began to die more often, backstories became less teen-friendly, and a shadow fell across what had been a fairly light little book up until that point. A lot of my time seemed to be spent fixing changes I had made the day before, and I was getting frustrated with the shifts in tone that seemed to be trying to take place in my story. It was as though someone was also whispering in my ear, telling me to spill blood or inject horror where none was needed. I found my mind wanting to write things that I had never been interested in before, and the feeling made me uneasy. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my great-grandfather reading some of my editions from the other side of the table. I had fallen asleep at the keys, and when I woke up, I saw his spindly arms scrolling down as he read. It was clear he didn't like using the computer. He made a face every time he had to touch the keyboard, as if putting his fingers on it was something unpleasant. And when he saw me noticing him, he turned the computer back towards me. Then, he did something I'd never seen him do in all the years I'd known him. He smiled. "You write well, boy. It's a little fluffy for my taste, but it appears that I'm not your target audience. How long have you been writing it?" I told him I'd been writing my current work for about a year, but I'd been writing in general for most of my life. He nodded, seeming to like the taste of this new information. "Thought I was the only one, at least since your Uncle Stephen passed." Then, he slid out of the chair, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the floor, and ambled back upstairs. After that, I seemed to notice him hovering around the dining room often as I made corrections and changes to my manuscript. At first I tried to ignore him, not wanting to make it awkward, but as the weeks tripped by, I asked if he'd like to come help me with my revisions. He declined at first, saying he needed to get back to work. But over time, he actually came to sit with me and helped me labor through the 500 pages of tween trash, as he often called it. Every new revision, the darker ones at least, seemed to interest him, and I found myself taking his suggestions more than I rejected them. Then, one day around Halloween, he invited me to his study. He said there was something he needed to show me. He was standing by the gigantic wingback chair when I arrived. He looked even more like an underfed child as he slid a hand over the arm, his head only slightly taller than the arm of the chair itself. "You've impressed me, son. Your writing is a little rough, but I suppose that all writing looks rough after a century of it. Many people have asked me how I've lived so long, and writing is the secret to my success. The writing, however, is only half of it. The other half is this." He stroked the chair again as he said it, a look between loathing and loving crossing his face. "Your chair?" I asked skeptically. "Not my chair. This chair was never mine. It was loaned to me on the grounds that I use it for its intended purpose." "And what purpose is that?" I asked, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickle. "Terror," he answered. I almost expected to hear thunder rumble outside as he made this exclamation. "The chair is meant to spread terror?" I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Great-grandpa didn't seem to notice. He just kept looking at the chair in that loathsomely fascinating way he had. The chair seemed to have him under its sway, and he was powerless to cleave from it. "The chair is a conduit. Its purpose is simple, to spread fear and to propagate terror. You've heard the whispers by now, I'm sure." I nodded, hearing them scurry across me even now as I watched my grandfather stroke the old chair that suddenly seemed to be shallowly respirating before my eyes. "From the second I read the changes to your manuscript, I knew it had gotten in your head. It calls to you, just as it called to me, and now it wants to make a deal." I took a step back from the chair. "What are you talking about? A deal? What sort of deal?" "You can write forever. Write as much as you want, and your work will make you the kind of money that puts normal men to shame. All you must do is sit in this chair and let it work through you. You can do that, can't you?" I wanted to refuse him, this grinning skeleton in his slowly but now visibly respirating chair. The longer I looked at it, the more I could see the baleful eyes, the fanning nostrils that were almost snake-like, the grinning mouth that sat in the seat. It looked at me, and as much as I wanted to deny what he was saying as the ramblings of a crazy old man, I couldn't. The chair's glamour had slipped away, and now I could see the monster that lay beneath. "Come sit," he beckoned. "Come sit and let it show you its power." I didn't want to. Sitting on that thing was the last thing I wanted to do, but I found my legs had other ideas. I had moved as if by magic, my legs that of a puppet's on strings. I expressed all my will, but I was a child resisting a hurricane. Great-grandfather moved aside as I came before his throne, and when my bottom slid into that hoary old thing, I expected the teeth to gobble me up. Instead, I was filled with something unexpected. I was filled with completion, a sense of homecoming. I was complete. I saw myself reach for the typewriter, as I had done in my dreams. The whispering beckoned me to write, compelling me to spill my talent for it, and I obliged. The words rolled from me. They weren't mine, not mine at all, but they oozed from my fingers like blood. My words became the click-clacking of the keys. My mind was a chalkboard fit only to be wiped and filled again and again. I was taken over, possessed, and the demon of inspiration capered through me. There was no endless paper now, but I saw the sheets filled and refilled again and again, made full only to be exchanged by another, and as I looked down at the ivory keys, I felt my sanity reassert itself as I saw the stains on that virgin ivory. They were dark, old blood, but they would surely be wetted again. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking up. I was lying on the bed in my great-grandfather's study. He was sitting on the edge of it, looking even more childlike as his legs dangled. It occurred to me how infrequently I saw him away from his keyboard in all the months I'd been here, and he looked both forlorn and greatly relieved as he watched his withered feet swing. "You did quite well. The first 300 pages of a manuscript that will soon grace the New York Times bestseller list, I am certain. At least, my agent seems to think so. I never have much of a head for popular fiction." "What?" But I realized I didn't know what to ask. "It kicks like a mule, don't it, son? I remember the first time I experienced it, back in 36, or was it 26? Who can remember? I was edging towards middle age then, kids out of the house and off on their own, and your great-grandmother had just died of a sudden pneumonia. I was alone in this mausoleum, sure that I had maybe one book in me, but unsure of how to coax it out. The man I bought the chair from showed up out of nowhere, showed up as if I had summoned him, and said he had just what I was looking for. Then he showed me this ghastly hulk you see crouching over there, and I was highly skeptical. My eyebrows slid up even more when he said that it had already been paid for." He got a dreamy look on his face, as though his mind was casting back through time. "He told me that all I had to do was write, just write, and the chair would do the rest. He told me that the chair would take my writing into heights that no one had ever dared hope, and all I had to do was shake his hand. When I sat down to begin, the man tipped his hat and grinned like an imp. I never looked back. At first, it was thrilling, churning out stories, books, whole series over the course of years. I was detailing my legacy at a breakneck speed. I was like a dragon, looking up to see decades pass by as I sat before my window." His dreamy look became melancholy then, his toes flapping bonelessly as his legs rose and fell like lunatic jackstraws. "This is my legacy, boy. This is the inheritance that all my children, and all my grandchildren, and all my great-grandchildren have struggled for. The money, the house, the land, none of it matters. My inheritance is that chair and that typewriter, and a legacy of stunning horror. It is a mantle, and if you chose not to take it up, I would understand. But, and I know from experience, if you don't take it up, you'll drive yourself crazy
thinking about what could have been. You'll wonder if the success you have couldn't have been greater, if the joy you felt could not have been more, and if your years upon the earth could not have been better spent.
He looked at me then with such naked hope that I realized what it would mean if I took this burden from him. He would die, but it seemed he was ready to die. His legacy would be mine. The paper would say that the talent ran in the family, and it would continue to run until I passed it on or fell to dust. In the end, I can't even say that I did what I did to save my great-grandfather from his continued suffering. In the end, I did it because he was right. If I didn't do it, I would always wonder what if. He extended his hand to me.
The papers are signed and sitting on my desk. The house, the land, it's all yours. Everything. And everything that comes with it, he emphasized. I'm proud to say that my hand didn't shake as I took his. On the third pump of his arm, my great-grandfather turned to dust, and I was left to sit and watch him scatter across the place he loved so much. Then I took my place in the mouth of that great beast and began to write. I would continue to do so for a very long time. It's been so long since I watched my grandsire dissolve before my eyes. In that time, I've been the most prolific horror writer of my age. I've built up money like some old dragon, sitting on my wealth as I hunker on my hill. Sometimes my relatives come to see me, but most times they don't. My own mother refused to talk to me after her great-grandfather left everything to me in his will, but I hardly noticed. She died a few years ago, or was it a few decades? I didn't attend the funeral. Being away from my work for too long makes the whispers less quiet. I travel some, as my grandfather must have done in the beginning, but I never stay away for long. The stories must be told, the conduit must be maintained, and I must remain the keeper of this black lighthouse. It takes a toll, though, to be certain. I understand why my great-grandfather slept so little. If I cannot continue to expel this darkness, it pools inside me, and the vivid nightmares often bring me screaming back to reality. The bags under my eyes have become luggage, and yesterday I glanced up into the window and thought I'd seen a ghost. The old man that looked out from it was withered and sunken, and I thought that great-grandpa's ghost had returned to torment me. I see now why great-grandfather moved into the corner after a time. I'm not entirely alone, though. My cousins have gone on to have children of their own, and sometimes they send them to me, as I was once sent. One of them, a girl named Katie, is on her way now. I've heard that Katie is a rather prolific poet, and said to be quite talented. We shall see what the chair makes of her. Who knows? Perhaps I might be allowed to stop too before long, and bask in the comfortable blackness that awaits me as well. I tried to sleep, but I remembered the black skies, the lightning too. It was all around me. I remembered each flash as time began to blur. Each flash had lit him up that evening, revealing to me the ravages of his face, of his pale, disheveled, decaying body, of the clothes which had ages and ages ago been white, torn now in several places, yellowing and covered in stains. I had shuddered at the sight, tempted to shut my eyes, his eyes too, as they glared and kept glaring at me, through me. Ma hadn't seen him, as always. She had in fact floated right past the rocking chair that had once been his favorite spot to read, but to me, he had never been more real. He had been in the chair that day as well. One doesn't simply abandon an old favorite after all. Hunched over, with limbs bent in awkward ways, and skin clinging onto bones for dear life. A grotesque, formless lump, a shadow. Yet he had been anything but quiet. The rumbling thunder had failed to drown out the sounds of his chattering teeth ringing in my ears. Had I imagined that look in his eyes? Had I imagined his raspy voice trying to call out my name? "Poor Doizila is going home," Ma had whispered.
standing by the kitchen window while smiling at the storm outside, at the trees flailing about in answer to the angry wind. I had known that name quite well, known just as well the havoc its owner was famous for wreaking wherever she went. Bordoizila, the newly married wind spirit, rushing through the towns and villages in her path, eagerly making her way back to her mother on her first trip home from her husband's house. That was the tale, told and retold for centuries within every house in Assam by wizened old mouths with tobacco-stained teeth, holding the attention of every child sitting there. I had inched closer and closer to Ma, the fear of the ghost getting the better of me, as it often did. Seldom had I seen such peace on her face as I saw at that moment. For the longest time, Ma had continued to look out into our backyard in silence. The wind had cried and howled, so loud I had tugged hard at her stole, insisting upon her presence, squealing to her how he had long been glaring at me. Much like on the occasions gone by, Ma had rolled her eyes. Not this again, her gaze had seemed to tell me. Can no one in this house let me have a moment to myself? Barely turning, she had passed me the bowl soon after, half filled with flattened rice and mashed bananas and bread, along with a glass of water. Give this to your grandfather. Go on, she said, before turning back to the window. I had no choice. Slowly, my trembling hands had taken the bowl up to him. I remember those skies very well. I remember them as a 10-year-old, when he, too, had at last traveled homeward one night. Death had come for my grandfather, almost begrudgingly, one would think, in his sleep, close to a year after that stormy April evening. Strangely enough, I remember them best now, when most other things are hard to remember. All the faces, the names, the numbers, when the grays and whites mingle in my matted hair as I lie in bed, every day dragging on longer than a year. I can feel my form shrinking to nothing. I can feel the wind outside growing stronger. My granddad's been going through a lot lately. After Grandma died, he kind of went a little mushy. We were asked to come and get him one night after he was found wandering near his house, the police suggesting that we might want to have someone keep an eye on him. Since I was just sitting around the house and doing nothing with my life, my parents extended the idea that this might give me a little freedom since I had recently been chafing under my father's rules. They gave me rules, of course, like no using my grandfather's house for wild parties, no sneaking girls in at all hours of the night, and my grandfather's safety would come first. If we get another call about him wandering off, he will be moving to the nursing home, and you will be moving back home. So, I moved my things in with Grandpa, and we became roommates. Grandpa was a pretty good roommate, all things considered. I lived upstairs in the loft. Grandpa had a loft-style house with a whole other dwelling upstairs. And he lived downstairs, since it was hard for him to get up and down the stairs sometimes. I did most of the cooking and cleaning. Grandpa bought the groceries and the beer, though that was our little secret, and we lived in harmony most days. The only thing that kind of annoyed me were the stories. Don't get me wrong, Grandpa has a lot of good stories. He's been in the Gulf War, he'd driven trucks in Alaska on treacherous roads, he'd spent almost all his life in the Appalachian Mountains. In fact, this house had been his childhood home. He had many stories about camping and exploring and roaming the woods around the property. Those I didn't mind hearing so much. There were many nights that Granddad and I would sit on the porch with a case of beer, and he would tell me stories about exploring the woods and discovering its majesty. It was the lies he would tell sometimes that really got to me. He made up some pretty outlandish claims about the woods that I just couldn't shake off. He would claim to have met a Sasquatch, running for his life as it chased him from the part of the woods it lived in. He had met forest spirits and spent a month in their camp as time moved differently there. He had met animal people, spoken with pale, moonlight guardians that lived underground, and many other things. It wasn't just drunken tales either. Those I could have forgiven, but he would ambush me sometimes with these strange little stories. You'd be washing dishes or cleaning the living room or brushing your teeth, and suddenly he'd just be behind you with a tall tale. I mostly rolled my eyes at these stories, but last night he had told me something just truly ridiculous. My best friend Ren turned into a tree. I had choked a little on my beer and finally set it down. I was a little drunk, and maybe I shouldn't have let it frustrate me, but these stories were becoming a bit much. I'd heard all manner of stories from Grandpa and just sort of shrugged them off or politely listened to them, but this one was so bizarre that it took me by surprise. His friend had turned into a tree? What the hell did that mean? Your friend turned into a tree, I challenged. Grandpa nodded and took a swig of his own beer. How, Grandpa? Tell me how a person turns into a tree. He looked thoughtful. It's kind of a long story. Are you sure you have time for it? I was off the next couple of days, so I guessed I did. Yeah, I would say I have time for it. Grandpa finished his beer and threw the bottle into the woods, and I heard it break against a nearby tree. This was a habit he had kept from my childhood, and no one seemed to be able to break him of it. The funny thing was that despite him smashing the bottles, I never found any glass in the woods around his house. I always assumed that Grandma had cleaned it up, but it had continued after Grandma was gone. Just one of life's little mysteries, I told myself. And so, Grandpa began his odd tale. When I was about 9, a new boy moved into the valley. His name was Renoir, but I always just called him Ren. His family was from the Bayou, Louisiana, and he was unsure how things worked out in the Appalachians. Still, I was glad for a new playmate, since our closest neighbor was 5 miles in either direction, and we played in the hills and forests around our home. Ren liked to find bugs and small spiders and put them in jars so he could study them. Ren fancied himself something of a scientist, and the Appalachian forests offered him much to explore. Now, the woods were always open to me. Mama never told us we couldn't explore, but Grandma had warned me never to go into the southern grove without her. It was beautiful there. The forest's old and different somehow from the rest of the sprawling valley. I would ask her why I couldn't explore there alone, and she would say that it was dangerous if you didn't know what not to touch and what to leave well enough alone. Like this, she'd say, pointing to a thick, almost honey-like sap that was oozing from a nearby tree. This is the sap of the old calabash tree. You never ever touch it, for if you do, not even I can help you. I asked her why, and she said that her grandma had told her the same many years ago, and she was now telling it to me. It's just one of those rules that we follow. One of those rules we don't question. I had always listened, but Ren was inquisitive. He wanted to explore everything, and he noticed that we were avoiding that particular stretch of forest. I had told him those stories about the places that we weren't allowed to go when we first met. I told him there were two-headed beetles that lived there. There were strange flowers in technicolor patterns, and the large trees that my grandma had always called calabash. He asked me to take him there, not really feeling comfortable exploring the woods alone yet. He was never far from my side when we were in the woods, and he asked me specifically one afternoon if we could go out there. We were young, 10 at the most, and it didn't take much to convince me. I had tried to remain steadfast, not wanting anything to happen since I never went there without Grandma. But he finally broke me down, and I agreed to take him. But I said that he had to do what I say. Don't touch nothing, I told him, especially if I say so. He promised that he wouldn't, and we set off for the grove. We stopped at his house before we went, and he came back with a backpack that clinked a little as he walked. I had little doubt that it was full of specimen jars and other such things. He may not have intended to touch, but he definitely intended to study. So we made our way to the grove, and as soon as he saw that oddly colored place, he was in love. The grove is a special place, you see.
Things there are closer to nature than anywhere else, and Grandma always said it was easy to feel the old world magic that connected the people to the earth, and the people who spent a lot of time there can sometimes hear the voice of the forest that others have forgotten. When Grandma read Robert Frost, she thought that maybe he had found some sort of grove of his own. We spent an hour just exploring the grove. Wren looked at the beetles, putting one into a jar so he could study it later, and sketched some of the plants that he made notes on. I showed him the calabash tree, that massive white gold giant, and I saw the wonder in his eyes that was there every time he found a bug or a leaf he didn't recognize. He approached it, and I understood his need to touch it. I myself had needed to touch it the first time to make really sure I understood what I was seeing. It's the size of it, I think. Your mind tells you that nothing that big can possibly be real, but once you touch it, you just know that it must exist. It wasn't until I saw him take his knife out that I realized what his true intentions were. I ran forward, telling him not to, but he seemed mesmerized by that golden bark of that towering tree. He wanted some. That much was obvious, but Grandma had always made it very clear that you do not strip the bark from the calabash tree. Wren didn't know. He probably assumed that a tree so large would have plenty of bark. He couldn't have known what lay beneath. As his knife slid easily into the soft bark of the calabash tree, a golden spurt of sap struck him full in the face. He stumbled back, the sap flowing as his knife quivered in the side of that massive trunk, and I saw him clutch his face and scream. I pulled him away from the tree. The roots threatened to trip him, and as his hands came down, I could see that his face was changing. His face was turning brown, his skin thickening, and the pigment of his eyes was beginning to film over as though he was blind. "What's happening?" Wren asked, his voice deepening as his throat stiffened. I didn't know, but I knew what I had to do. I left his bag on the ground, the jars slamming together angrily, and pulled him onto my shoulders. We were both 3 miles out into the woods, but Wren wasn't very heavy. He was small, even for a boy of 10, and I pulled him onto my back and carried him with very little effort. We ran, heading for my grandmother's house. Grandma would know what to do. She would fix him. As I ran, I just knew that if I could get him there, she could save him. We hadn't gone far when he started getting heavy. Like I said, he wasn't large, but I was only 10, and Wren was starting to get really heavy. The boy was light when we left the grove, me walking as I bounced him on my back, but he became heavier and heavier as we walked. His arms hung uselessly at my sides, and his body became like a stone in the center of my back. His legs started to shake as my progress was slowed to a crawl. When I was drawing up short, I thought maybe one of his feet caught on something. I looked back and almost dropped him. His feet had elongated until they dug up behind me, his toes becoming long and searching. They were pushing their way down into the ground, and as I pulled, they attempted to root themselves in the dirt. I pulled him along, trying my best to get him to my grandmother's, but eventually I just couldn't take him any further. We were in a clearing, a stream trickling through that I knew would be a heavy little crossing with the winter flow, and I left him there, saying I would go get help. Wren called me back, though, and asked me to stay with him. I told him that I couldn't do that. If I gave up, he'd be stuck like this. My grandma knew about these sorts of things, and she might be able to help him. I made all kinds of excuses, but in the end, I was just scared. This was so weird, so odd, and my 10-year-old brain didn't know what to do about it. He said, please, and asked me to stay, his voice cracking like a branch in a high wind. And after some hesitation, I sat and said that I would. His arms and legs were stiff and bark-like, and he cried tears of yellow sap. I wanted to reach out and wipe them away, but I remembered what that sap had done to him and resisted. His feet were growing, breaking the ground and sliding into the earth as they sought purchase. I asked him how he was feeling, and he said it was very strange. He said that as he grew, everything seemed to slow down, to lighten, and he was filled with an odd sense of eternity. He said he felt ancient and brand new. He felt lonely, yet filled with the knowledge that he was never alone. He felt sad for the life he was leaving behind, but excited for the life that was beginning. The process took about 20 minutes from start to finish, and I sat with him as he changed, not wanting him to go through it alone. His skin thickened, taking on a wooden cast as his legs descended into the earth. His chest expanded, Ren groaning as his bones and his body grew, and his small arms were thrust upward as he reached for the sky. His face and body sort of grew into one, becoming his trunk, and his eyes began to sink into his newly formed trunk body. Much too soon, he was a tree, and I was left sitting beside a half-grown sapling with a pair of expressive rings in its trunk. I was left looking into those way too expressive eyes as he sat looking out onto the forest, never to move again. I sat there, mouth agape, as Grandpa finished his story. What happened after that? Surely no one believed that he had turned into a tree. Grandpa shook his head. Only one person. My family and his spent the night searching the woods with a search party from the town. They thought that something had happened to him, and my brain had made up something to cope with it. They could see I was shaken by whatever had happened, and they still wanted to find Ren to make sure he was okay. I tried to tell them, tried to explain what had happened, but my grandma appeared at that moment and wrapped an arm around me. She told them she would watch me while the town searched, and took me into her house for a cocoa. Over cocoa and cookies, she told me that she had tried to warn me about the grove. She said it was a tragedy what had happened, but that was the way of the world sometimes. He took a last pull off his beer and launched it into the woods. She said that life was cruel sometimes, but that there was an order. Ren had tried to go outside that order. He had broke the rules, and that cruelty took its revenge. She reminded me that I must never go against that order, not if I wanted to live amongst nature. I thought about this before shaking my head and telling him I didn't believe it. People don't just turn into trees, Grandpa. He gave me a strange look and just walked into the house. I thought that was the end of the story, but that would be too easy for Grandpa. He woke me up the next morning, about 3 hours before I wanted to be up, and asked if I wanted to meet Ren. It took my fuzzy brain a few minutes to realize what he was talking about before I remembered the story and asked if he meant the tree. Yes, would you like to meet him? I sighed. I didn't have anything going on that day, so I agreed. We walked into the woods, Grandpa ambling along, and hiked for about an hour into the crisp morning air. For a man in his 70s, Grandpa moved with an odd grace through the familiar woods of his childhood. I suppose he always had, but it was more pronounced now that he was so old. The squirrels and birds were just starting to get noisy, and I could hear the sounds of the forest as we walked. The wind in the trees, the soft noises of small animals in the brush as they avoided the louder sounds of people, the sigh of the leaves,
as they pushed and pulled towards their inevitable death. Having come here often with my grandparents, I too had become aware of the sounds and tempers of the Appalachian forest. My cousins and I had often found it beautiful and mysterious, but it could be fickle and temperamental too. Just ask my cousin Jeremy, who had twisted his ankle in a hole, only to find that hole was the home of a rattlesnake. If you could ask him, since he'd died while we were getting help. Grandpa led us to a clearing, a small stream bubbling beside it with fresh snow run, and I could see a large, golden-barked tree growing not far from the river. It was towering, probably 15 feet tall, and as I approached, Grandpa shot a hand out and pointed down. I had nearly stepped into a small stream of honey-colored sap that was trickling away from the tree and making its way towards the river.
Don't want 2 calabashes growing so close together, Grandpa chuckled.
He greeted the tree as we approached and came around to its front to touch its trunk. The tree didn't move, didn't speak, but as I came up, I could see a swirl pattern on the front that looked like 2 huge eyes. The eyes seemed to follow you whenever you moved, which was a little unsettling. Though unsettling, the tree looked no different from any other, except for the color and the weird sap. It wasn't until the wind picked up through the branches, shaking the leaves and making them dance, that I thought I heard a creaky old voice say, "Hello, Howard," in response to my grandfather's greeting. We spent some time there, just talking that day. It seems I have a lot to learn from Grandpa's old stories. Maybe I'll tell you some more sometime, if Grandpa's feeling talkative.